What would you do if you saw a woman struck in the face mid-flight by the very person meant to serve and protect her safety? What if that woman said nothing in return and simply sat back down in silence? Now imagine that woman wasn't just any passenger. She was someone powerful, but no one on that plane knew who she really was. Not the flight attendant, not the crew, not even the teen who happened to capture it all on camera. Why did she stay silent? Why didn't she fight back? And what happened when the truth about her identity was finally revealed? This is not just a story about a slap on a plane. It's about the silence that followed, the assumptions made, the systems exposed, and one woman's quiet path toward justice, not with noise, but with presence. Before we begin this powerful journey aboard Flight 715, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because some stories are too important to ignore, and this one might just change the way you see the world. Now, let's begin. The hum of the boarding gate announcements blended with the rhythm of rolling suitcases and quiet sighs. Raven Air Flight 715 was boarding for a non-stop route from Atlanta to San Francisco. A late afternoon departure, just after the rain cleared and golden sunlight poured through the glass-paneled terminal windows, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it felt. Doctor Celeste Monroe stood near the back of the line, one hand on her mother's shoulder, the other gripping a carry-on bag packed with medication and neatly folded documents. Her mother, Evelyn, leaned slightly on her oxygen-assisted walker, her breath shallow but steady. She wore a light purple shawl and a soft beige cardigan. A silver pin shaped like a caduceus glinted near her collar. Celeste had given it to her after medical school, back when she still thought healing people would be enough to heal the world. "Seat 14C," Celeste said softly as they stepped into the narrow plane aisle. "We're almost there." "Mama." Evelyn nodded, her voice light. "Don't rush, baby." These legs don't do turbulence well on land either. Their row was near the middle of the cabin, an aisle seat for Evelyn. Celeste had specifically called the airline 2 weeks ago to confirm the oxygen policy, request an early boarding note, and verify a bulkhead seat for space. But none of those requests had made it past the script-reading customer service line. They boarded like everyone else, tired, anonymous, and invisible. When they reached row 14, Celeste found that another passenger had mistakenly taken their seat, a young man with headphones on. She smiled politely, explaining the situation, and he moved with a shrug. Just as Celeste helped Evelyn settle into her seat and secured the oxygen line, a sharp voice cut through the air. "You can't block the aisle." "Ma'am, we're boarding." Celeste turned to see a flight attendant, blonde, early 40s, tense shoulders, and eyes that scanned people like problems. The name tag read, "Claire." "My apologies," Celeste said, her voice calm. "We're just making sure her oxygen is secure before I sit." Claire leaned in closer, sighing audibly. "You should have pre-boarded if you needed extra time." Celeste forced a breath. "We requested that, but the gate agent didn't call our name." "Well, it's not my job to track everyone down," Claire snapped. "You're holding up boarding. Either sit down or let us move." Passengers were starting to stare. Celeste felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice even. "I just want to make sure my mother is comfortable before I sit." Claire rolled her eyes and reached forward, adjusting the oxygen tubing abruptly without asking. Evelyn winced. "Please let me handle it," Celeste said, moving to block the interference. Claire stepped back but muttered loud enough for both of them to hear. "You people always need something." Silence. The words hung in the air like the sudden drop of cabin pressure. Celeste froze, blinking. Evelyn turned her face toward the window, her lips tightening. Celeste said nothing. Not yet. Claire turned on her heel and moved down the aisle, snapping at a family trying to stow their stroller. Celeste sat slowly. Her mind raced, but her hands moved methodically, adjusting the oxygen line again, double-checking Evelyn's comfort. She had done this for years. As a trauma surgeon, she had learned to operate under pressure, to keep her rage in check, to channel it into precision. But this wasn't a surgery room. This was a plane full of strangers, and her mother had just been reduced to a problem. The cabin began to fill up. Luggage thumped into overhead bins. A toddler cried 2 rows ahead. Across the aisle, a college-age girl chewed gum and scrolled through her phone. It was all so normal, and yet Celeste's body was tense, waiting without knowing for what. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. Not yet. Let it go, Evelyn whispered, still facing the window. Don't give her anything. Celeste leaned closer. She can't talk to you like that. Mama, like you don't matter. She's not the first, Evelyn said softly. She won't be the last. Those words stung. They weren't wrong. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Raven Air Flight 715. As he spoke, Claire walked back through the cabin for final checks. She paused briefly at their row, but said nothing. Her eyes flicked towards Celeste like a silent dare. Celeste stared back, steady, still. The plane pulled away from the gate. As the engines roared to life and the aircraft pushed down the runway, Celeste thought about all the times she had stayed quiet, all the times she'd minimized herself to avoid being called difficult, every time she was mistaken for a nurse instead of a surgeon, every patient who asked for a second opinion when she walked into the room. The plane lifted off the ground. Outside the window, the city shrank into squares of light. Beside her, Evelyn had closed her eyes. Her chest rose and fell with quiet effort. Celeste whispered, almost without sound, "You're not invisible." But the words were more for herself than anyone else. The seat near 14C was quiet for now. But something was about to unravel. Something no one on board, especially Claire, was prepared for. By the time Raven Air 715 reached cruising altitude, the tension that had begun in row 14 hadn't dissipated, it had simply gone quiet. That kind of quiet where the body still holds the memory of the moment. The quiet you feel in your bones long after the noise stops. Celeste Monroe sat upright, arms folded gently across her lap, her fingers interlocked to keep from tightening into fists. The cabin lights dimmed to their soft amber glow. The aisles fell into murmurs and the rustle of snack wrappers. Flight attendants pushed carts forward, offering drinks and a practiced smile. Claire was among them, her eyes avoiding Celeste's row altogether. Celeste had tried to focus her energy on Evelyn, who now dozed beside her. But her mother's breaths were shallow, not dangerously so, but thinner than usual. The portable oxygen device hummed gently at her feet. Celeste adjusted the nasal cannula again, instinctively scanning the tubing, the valve, and the canister dial. Then she noticed it. The oxygen flow was weakening. The machine was on, but something was restricting the delivery. She tapped the side panel, adjusted the flow knob, then tried replacing the extension tube. The issue wasn't technical, it was placement. The canister was tilted at an awkward angle beneath the seat due to the limited space, and Evelyn's feet were partially resting on the line. "Mama," she whispered, gently lifting her mother's legs to adjust. Evelyn stirred slightly, but didn't open her eyes. Celeste sat forward and pressed the call button above her. The tiny light blinked. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The light remained on. No one came. She waited another 30 seconds. Still nothing. She pressed the button again. Finally, Claire appeared, walking with quick steps and a forced smile. But when she saw who had called, her face faltered. "Yes," she asked curtly. "I need help repositioning the oxygen tank," Celeste said quietly, gesturing toward her mother. "She's not getting full flow." Claire glanced down. "It's working. She's breathing. It's not flowing properly. I just need the tank shifted slightly, or access to a different configuration so I can make sure she's stabilized." Claire folded her arms. "We can't be rearranging the whole cabin mid-flight. You should have handled this before takeoff." Celeste blinked. "I did request assistance before takeoff. I'm asking again because it's a medical need, not a comfort issue." Claire stepped closer. Her voice dropped but sharpened. "Look, I don't have time for another argument. You people think everything is an emergency." Celeste sat back, stunned. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't move. She simply said, "Excuse me," Claire scoffed. Then reached down abruptly, tugging at the tank's position, jostling the line that ran under Evelyn's blanket. Evelyn jerked in her seat, her eyes fluttering open. "Mama," Celeste said quickly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Don't touch her," Celeste said sharply to Claire. Claire's hand froze. "Still near the tank," Celeste added. "You don't get to put your hands on my mother without asking." Claire withdrew her hand as if burned. "I'm trying to help. You're trying to control," Celeste answered, her voice low but pointed. Passengers nearby began glancing over. A few heads turned, sensing something was unfolding. Claire straightened. "You're making a scene." Celeste exhaled slowly. She could feel her heart pressing against her ribcage, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm asking for the bare minimum of dignity." Claire stared at her for one long second. Then she muttered, "You people always act like victims," turned around, and walked off. A cold silence settled like fog across the aisle. Celeste didn't move. Neither did Evelyn. The words echoed through her like the hollow ring of a bell. Familiar. Cutting. Repetitive in a way that almost made her feel numb. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Evelyn turned her head. "You all right?" Baby Celeste gave a shallow nod. Evelyn touched her daughter's hand. "You don't have to fight them every time. Sometimes silence saves more than your voice does." Celeste didn't reply right away. Her eyes drifted to the overhead panel. Her throat felt tight, but she kept it under control. After a pause, she asked, "But what if my silence teaches them they're right?" Evelyn looked away again, a flicker of pain passing across her face. She didn't have an answer. Across the aisle, a teenager with a hoodie and earbuds was watching. His phone was halfway in his lap. He wasn't trying to be subtle, but he wasn't mocking, just watching. Curious, or maybe concerned. Celeste couldn't tell. She looked out the window. Dark clouds were curling beneath them like smoke. The plane shook slightly from turbulence, just enough to rattle the plastic cups. A different flight attendant, a younger woman with a kind smile, came by a moment later. "Everything all right over here?" she asked gently. Celeste nodded. "We've got it. Thank you." When the woman moved on, Evelyn whispered, "You didn't have to lie." "I'm just tired." "Mama," Celeste whispered, "tired of being tested on planes, in hospitals, on sidewalks, everywhere." Evelyn said nothing, just squeezed her daughter's hand softly. Celeste leaned back against her seat. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on her breathing, not the heat in her face or the sting behind her eyes. She thought of the award ceremony she was flying to, the one honoring her for a decade of medical humanitarian work. They were planning to introduce her as the hands behind the miracle in Mumbai for her rapid trauma response work during the floods. But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just another problem. A woman asking too much. A black woman not shrinking fast enough. She tried to shut her mind off, but then she felt the shift, the kind of moment you only recognize after too many experiences like this. The air in the cabin had changed. She opened her eyes. Claire was back, and she was standing directly in front of row 14. There was a look on her face, something unreadable, panic, embarrassment, fury. Celeste couldn't tell. Then, without a word of warning, Claire leaned down and slapped Celeste across the face. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't subtle. It was a clean, hard slap. Evelyn gasped. The sound of the strike echoed through the cabin like someone had dropped metal onto tile. Passengers froze. The woman across the aisle dropped her water bottle. The teen in the hoodie yanked his earbuds out. A baby began to cry. A man 2 rows ahead stood up, stunned. Time fractured. For 1 full second. Celeste didn't move. Her hand went instinctively to her cheek, but her expression didn't change. She stood up slowly. Claire stepped back, realizing what she'd done, but it was too late. Everyone had seen. The teenager lifted his phone. Recording? Claire opened her mouth to explain, but no sound came out. And Celeste, with all the restraint she had learned through years of surgeries, grief, loss, and resistance, simply looked Claire in the eye and said, "I'd like to speak to the captain." Now, no shouting, no trembling, just the quiet thunder of a woman who had endured enough. Passengers looked at one another. A murmur spread down the aisle. Someone whispered, "Did she just hit her?" Someone else added, "I got it on video." Claire stood frozen, and then she turned and walked away without a word. Celeste didn't sit back down. She remained standing, not in rage, but in something deeper, a quiet refusal to be erased. The silence after the slap was not quiet. It was a roar. Celeste stood in the aisle, her right hand resting gently on her cheek where Claire's palm had landed seconds earlier. There was no blood, no bruise, not yet. But something inside her had cracked wide open. Not broken. No, not that. Just exposed. Like a window that had been closed too long, suddenly letting in wind. The cabin didn't move. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the humming engines and a soft beep from an unattended call button. 4 rows up. Evelyn sat, frozen in her seat, her fingers twitching against the armrest. Her daughter had just been struck. Her body wanted to rise. Her soul wanted to scream. But her age and her breath and her sorrow kept her still. Celeste's voice came quiet, but clear. "I'd like to speak to the captain." The words hung in the air, deliberate, precise. Claire had already turned away, walking briskly toward the front of the aircraft. Her face was tight, unreadable. She didn't offer a word of explanation. She didn't look back. Celeste didn't sit. She simply remained standing, body calm, but every nerve lit like a power grid. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her jaw didn't clench. But inside, her thoughts raced with layered voices. Why did she do it? Was it just me? Did anyone else see? Does it matter? Will they believe me? The internal dialogue was rapid, automatic, trained over years of incidents that blurred together patients who challenged her credentials, coworkers who questioned her tone, strangers who assumed things about her body, her voice, her place. She heard a whisper. She slapped her. Then another. Oh my God, I saw it. A middle-aged man across the aisle pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. Behind her, someone spoke louder now. She hit her. She actually hit her. And still, Celeste didn't move. She stood for her mother, her patients, her students, her younger self, the medical student who once cried in a supply closet after being ignored during surgery prep. She stood because something had shifted, and it could not be undone. After a moment, the captain emerged. He stepped out from behind the cockpit door with the kind of presence that quieted a room, even though the room was already still. Tall, clean-shaven, and in his early 50s, Captain Jasper Reed wore authority without arrogance. He had flown in the military before transitioning to commercial aviation. His voice, when he spoke, had the weight of someone who had seen real storms. "What's going on here?" he asked. "Scanning the cabin." Celeste turned toward him. Her voice was steady, measured. "I was struck by your flight attendant, unprovoked, in front of dozens of witnesses." He blinked, stunned, but not dismissive. "Ma'am, did you say—" "Struck." Celeste nodded once. She slapped me across the face. The captain's eyes scanned her expression. He wasn't looking for proof. He was reading the air, the passengers, the hushed crowd, the silent verdict already passed by the people on board. A woman in row 12 spoke up. "I saw it. She hit her. Hard." Another voice. A man's. "I got it on video. I was recording already because the attendant was being nasty earlier." Trevor, the teenager in the hoodie, raised his hand, phone still glowing. "I have it too." "She didn't do anything wrong." Captain Reed's face changed. Not anger. Something closer to disappointment, weariness. He turned to the flight deck, nodded to the co-pilot, then returned his gaze to Celeste. "Are you okay?" he asked. Celeste answered, "I'm fine, but my mother is shaken. She's 81. She has respiratory issues, and now she's afraid." The captain looked down at Evelyn, whose eyes were glistening but focused. She met his gaze and nodded faintly, as if to confirm her daughter's words. Without hesitation, the captain turned to the intercom, pressed a button, and said, "Claire Donnelly to the front galley. Now." He then turned back to Celeste. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Please give me a moment to handle this." Celeste nodded once. Claire appeared seconds later, eyes wide now. She seemed pale, like the adrenaline had drained her body and left only confusion or fear. The captain stepped aside and gestured toward the front cabin. She hesitated. He didn't repeat himself. Claire moved, shoes clicking lightly on the aisle floor, and disappeared behind the curtain. The captain followed. Celeste sat, finally, lowering herself with slow control into the seat beside Evelyn. Her mother reached for her hand. "You okay?" Evelyn whispered. "I don't know yet," Celeste answered. Behind her, the whispers resumed. Not malicious, not gossipy, just present. People trying to make sense of what they'd seen, of what they hadn't expected to witness 30,000 feet in the air. The scene wasn't violent in the traditional sense. There was no brawl, no broken bones. But something had broken nonetheless. The barrier between private and public. The idea that some things don't happen here. The belief that if you are calm, composed, accomplished, you are safe. A soft chime rang out. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice said, "we apologize for the disruption. A crew reassignment is currently in progress. We'll continue beverage service shortly. We thank you for your understanding. That was it. No mention of what happened, just enough to acknowledge change. Celeste closed her eyes. Just for a moment. The hum of the engines returned to the foreground. The world around her felt like a dull echo chamber, distant, as if her body was still present, but her spirit had floated 6 feet above her head to observe everything from the ceiling tiles. A quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Monroe." She turned. The younger flight attendant who had helped them earlier knelt beside her row. Her voice was gentle, her presence non-threatening. "I just want you to know I'm here if you need anything. I saw what happened. It was wrong." Celeste nodded. "Thank you. I can stay close if that feels better," the woman added. "We're all a little shaken." Celeste smiled faintly, a sad smile, one made of gratitude and fatigue. "You're kind. Stay near the back if that's easier. I just want my mother to be calm." The attendant nodded and stood, quietly walking toward the galley. Trevor across the aisle leaned forward slightly. "You really are Dr. Celeste Monroe." "Right," he whispered. She turned to him. "I saw a video about you," he said. "You ran a clinic in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. You worked 36 hours straight." Celeste offered a quiet smile. "That was a long time ago." "You're kind of a hero," he added. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. "Even heroes get slapped," she said softly. Trevor nodded, his face thoughtful. She could see it in his eyes. His understanding that what had just happened was not just a story for his friends, or a viral clip, or a moment to retell in a dorm room someday. It was something more, something uncomfortable and real. The air inside Raven Air 715 hadn't shifted because of a sound. It had shifted because people had finally decided to listen. The hum of the engine seemed louder now, as if the plane itself had become aware of the silence hanging in its cabin. "Doctor." Celeste Monroe sat motionless in seat 14C. Her fingers rested lightly on her lap, but her thoughts swirled like air pockets in turbulence. She was used to navigating crisis zones, hospitals filled with smoke and sirens, lives slipping away beneath her hands. But this was different. This was violence disguised as service, a public attack wrapped in the uniform of professionalism. The slap still echoed in her memory, not just in sensation, but in meaning, beside her. Evelyn had drifted back into sleep, or something close to it. Her chest rose and fell in soft rhythms. Celeste kept glancing over to check the oxygen flow. Everything seemed stable now, at least on the surface. Behind them, voices stirred. Passengers weren't returning to books or movies just yet. They were processing, whispering, recalibrating their understanding of what they'd witnessed. No one had yelled, no one had thrown fists, but a line had been crossed, and everyone knew it. From the galley curtain near the cockpit, the younger flight attendant reappeared. Her name tag read May. She approached slowly and crouched down at Celeste's row. "Captain Reed wants to speak with you when you're ready. We can do it here, or he can come to you." Celeste nodded. "I'll go up front." May stood back up, offered a respectful smile, and led her toward the cockpit. Passengers tracked her with their eyes but said nothing, not out of disinterest, but reverence. The way people behave when they've seen someone endure a moment they secretly fear for themselves. At the front, Captain Reed stood just outside the cockpit door, arms folded. His eyes were steady, calm, the kind of calm earned through decades of storms. "Dr. Monroe," he began. I reviewed statements from several passengers. "I've seen one of the videos. I want to say first that what happened to you is unacceptable. not just as a matter of policy, but as a matter of principle. You were not at fault. What you endured should never happen on any aircraft, let alone in front of your own mother." Celeste nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that. Claire has been relieved of her duties for the remainder of the flight." He continued, "She's confined to the forward crew quarters. Security will meet us upon landing in Chicago. I've also notified corporate. There will be an official review, but if I'm being honest, that's not what matters most right now. What has Celeste asked? That you're okay, and that we acknowledge the weight of what happened. Not just the slap, but everything that led to it. The tone, the dismissal, the assumptions." Celeste looked at him. She wasn't sure whether to be moved or skeptical. It was rare to hear someone name the whole pattern. Captain Reed sighed. "My daughter is in her second year at Howard. Pre-med. She's had professors talk about you. She watches your talks online. She texted me when she saw your name on the passenger manifest. Told me to say hi if I had the chance. I was going to introduce myself after the flight. I didn't expect it to be like this." Something softened in Celeste's chest. The tension didn't vanish, but it thinned, like clouds parting slightly, to let a little light in. "I appreciate that," she said. "Can I do anything else?" he asked. Celeste paused. "Yes. Make sure May doesn't get punished for being decent. I saw the way she looked at me. That kind of empathy gets buried in environments like this. Don't let that happen to her." Captain Reed nodded. "Understood." Celeste turned to leave, but stopped. "One more thing. There's a woman in row 19. Tall, red hair, glasses. She saw everything, too. I think she tried to speak up, but hesitated. Maybe talk to her. Let her know her voice matters. People don't always know they're allowed to use it." He looked at her carefully. "You really are a teacher at heart?" Celeste smiled. "I try." She walked back to her seat slowly, absorbing the shift in energy. The cabin had changed again. Something deeper than before. Not pity, not curiosity. Something closer to reverence. Or maybe accountability. Trevor, the teenager across the aisle, gave her a small nod as she passed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. It was the nod of someone who had grown up fast in the last 2 hours. Back in her row, Evelyn opened her eyes. "Everything okay, baby, for now," Celeste said gently. As she sat, a flight attendant appeared again. Not Claire, of course, but a tall man named Marcus. He bent slightly to address her discreetly. The captain authorized a seat upgrade. "First class has an opening if you'd like more space for you and your mother." Celeste blinked. Her first instinct was to refuse. She had never been the type to seek perks. But then she looked at Evelyn's narrow seat, the angle of her oxygen canister, the tight foot space. "Is there room for both of us?" "Yes, ma'am. 2 seats together." Celeste looked at her mother, then back to Marcus. "We'll take it. Thank you." Marcus nodded, motioned for assistance, and within minutes, 2 staff members gently helped Evelyn and her device up toward the front of the plane. Passengers made way without hesitation. In row 2A and 2B, Celeste and Evelyn settled into wider seats with warm towels and bottled water already waiting. Trevor passed by on the way to the restroom. He looked at Celeste, paused, then offered a thumbs up. She smiled. A real one this time, the kind that reaches the eyes. A woman across the aisle leaned over. "I just want you to know," she said softly. "I've flown 100 times, and I've never seen someone handle something so ugly with so much grace." Celeste nodded. "Thank you. I wish I didn't have to." "We all wish that," the woman replied. "But it matters that you did." Celeste leaned back. For the first time since takeoff, she exhaled fully. The pressure in her chest began to ease, not disappear, just loosen. That was enough for now. As the plane glided through the sky toward Chicago, the passengers settled again. Movies resumed. Books reopened. But a current remained in the air. The quiet understanding that something had happened on this flight that no one would forget, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And truth, once seen, does not go unseen. First class was quieter than coach. But it wasn't just the noise level. It was the mood, the air. The conversations here were polite, low, measured. Even the clinking of silverware on ceramic was delicate. A woman in a silk scarf gave Celeste a brief glance, her eyes hovering just long enough to register something had happened, but not long enough to invite dialogue. Evelyn was sleeping now, her head tilted gently against a cushioned headrest, the rhythm of her breath steady and soft. Celeste sat beside her, upright, gaze distant. She looked out the window at the clouds. She always found them deceptive, so soft in appearance, yet so full of turbulence if entered the wrong way. Like people, she thought. She hadn't cried, not in front of the passengers, not in front of the captain, not even when her mother gripped her hand after the slap. But now, in this strange silence, she felt something raw rise beneath her ribs. Not sadness, not quite rage. It was recognition. The realization that even after everything, her titles didn't protect her, her legacy didn't shield her, her dignity didn't matter. Not to the one person who saw her not as a human being, but as a problem. They don't know who she is. The sentence looped in her mind, over and over. Except now she wasn't sure if it was about Claire or herself. Who was she, really, to her students? She was Professor Monroe, the one who never accepted sloppy citations, who always wore navy or earth tones, who left handwritten notes in the margins of final exams. To her patients in disaster zones. She was the doctor who showed up barefoot after floodwaters destroyed the clinic, who stitched wounds by flashlight, who spoke just enough Haitian Creole to calm a sobbing child. To her mother, she was still just Celie, the little girl who read Langston Hughes out loud while sitting on the kitchen counter. But to the flight attendant today, she was a problem. A black woman with a calm voice, a sick mother, and a presence too composed to control. That was enough. Celeste reached into her carry-on and pulled out a worn leather journal. The cover was scratched, the spine creased from years of use. She opened to a blank page and began writing slowly. Altitude doesn't change perception. I was 30,000 feet above the earth and still beneath her judgment. The words felt heavy, but honest. She kept writing, filling lines with observations, flashes of memory, fragments of thought. It was how she processed the world by giving it language. She remembered something her father used to say before he passed. If someone doesn't know your story, they will assign you one. And it usually starts with what makes them comfortable. That's what had happened. Claire had assigned her a story, a difficult passenger, an attitude, a threat. The slap wasn't just physical. It was the punctuation mark at the end of a narrative Claire had written in her mind before Celeste ever spoke. A rustling across the aisle broke her concentration. The woman in the silk scarf had taken off her sunglasses. She was watching Celeste now, her eyes softer than before, hesitant but curious. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said gently, "but I just wanted to say I saw part of what happened earlier. I didn't understand it all, but it felt wrong." Celeste closed her journal. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." The woman leaned in a little. Can I ask, what do you do if it's not too personal? Celeste offered a faint smile. I'm a doctor and a professor. The woman's eyebrows lifted. I thought so. You carry yourself like someone who holds lives in their hands. Celeste's smile faltered slightly. Maybe that's true, but I think today I was reminded that no matter how much you carry, it can be taken from you in an instant, or worse, ignored entirely. The woman nodded, her face thoughtful. My name's Kathleen. By the way, I used to work in publishing before retirement. You look like someone I edited once. Do you write sometimes? Kathleen smiled. Keep writing. She returned to her seat, and Celeste sat back again, watching the sky. For a brief moment, she imagined herself younger, maybe 17, sitting in the back of a city bus, earbuds in, world tuned out. Back then, she thought that success would protect her, that degrees and decorum and discipline would lift her above moments like this. She had been wrong, or maybe not wrong, just incomplete. Success didn't stop injustice, but it could shine a brighter light on it. Trevor passed by again, headed back from the restroom. As he returned to his seat, he paused at her row. Hey, he said quietly. Just so you know, the video. It's clear, really clear. I'm not posting it or anything without your okay, but I think a lot of people need to see it. Celeste met his eyes. Thank you for saying that. Can you send it to me first? He nodded quickly. Of course. I'll airdrop it now. Within seconds. Her phone buzzed. Celeste opened the file. There she was, standing calmly. Claire walking up. The slap. The sound. The reactions. Even on screen. The moment felt violent. Not because of the motion, but because of the clarity. It was so clear, so unjust. She saved it. Then she looked at the time. Still 3 hours left in the flight. 3 hours to think, to reflect, to wonder what would happen once the wheels touched down. Would the airline issue a quiet statement? Would Claire be quietly reassigned? Would the media twist it into something messy? Her stomach turned at the thought. This wasn't what she wanted her name associated with. She hadn't sought attention. She hadn't made a scene. But now the scene was made, and it carried her name. She thought about calling her assistant, Nia. Thought about asking her to prepare a statement, but then decided against it. Not yet. She needed to finish this flight, to walk off the jet bridge with her mother, to breathe. The curtain behind her rustled again. May returned, placing a fresh glass of water on her tray. You're doing better than anyone I've ever seen, she whispered. Celeste looked up. Am I? May nodded. Most people either explode or shrink. You did neither. You stood still. And that shook everyone. Celeste took the water, sipped, and whispered back. Thank you for seeing me. May paused, then said something she hadn't expected. People will know who you are now. And with that, she returned to the galley. Celeste stared ahead. Maybe May was right. Maybe they would finally know who she was. But more importantly, maybe they'd realize who they had never bothered to see in the first place. The seatbelt sign blinked on again, this time not due to turbulence but descent. A gentle voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Chicago O'Hare. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Celeste Monroe tightened hers slowly, the buckle clicking with quiet finality. Evelyn stirred beside her, stretching a little under the soft cabin lights. You all right? Mama Evelyn gave her a tired but steady look. I will be, now that we're almost there. Celeste reached over, adjusted the oxygen tube gently behind her mother's ear. The rhythm of caring came naturally. It was instinctual, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Not in the sky, not in the hum of the engine, but in what awaited them when they touched ground. Her phone vibrated again. Trevor had messaged a simple update. 3 versions of the video are circulating. None from me. I only sent you mine. But it's out there now. Celeste blinked. Her heart didn't race exactly, but it shifted, like it had been nudged out of one rhythm into another. She turned her screen around so Evelyn could see it. Her mother squinted, watching the frozen image of Celeste being struck. "You okay if it spreads?" Evelyn asked softly. Celeste didn't answer right away. She looked back at the image, the stillness, the echo of the moment she'd already relived a dozen times. "It's already happening," she said quietly. "I can't stop it now." Evelyn nodded, then leaned her head gently against Celeste's shoulder. The years between them melted away for a moment. Mother and daughter, still tethered in ways deeper than words. From the front galley, Marcus passed through, making final checks. He paused at Celeste's row. "Security will be waiting upon arrival," he said in a low voice. "Captain Reed requested them personally. It'll be discreet." Celeste gave a short nod. "Is Claire still up front?" "Yes, but she's not speaking to anyone. Not even us. They took her badge and her credentials already." Celeste exhaled, not in satisfaction, not in vengeance, just release and May. "She's fine, quiet. But I think what happened changed her in a good way. Good. Protect her. We will." The plane's nose dipped slightly. Below. Chicago's suburbs began appearing through the window, tiny squares of amber and white light stitched across the dark canvas of night. Celeste closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of the people watching that video now, in offices, in kitchens, in bedrooms, on trains. Maybe some of them were like her. Maybe some were like Claire. And maybe a few were on the edge, teetering between silence and speaking up. Watching this might be the thing that pushed them forward. A memory surfaced, uninvited but strong. A conference in Berlin. She'd just finished a keynote on trauma-informed response protocols in post-conflict regions. A young black woman approached her afterward, eyes bright with emotion. "You made me feel seen," she'd whispered. Celeste had thanked her, smiled, moved on. But now, that sentence came back with new weight. Seen. Not just for her credentials, not just for her composure, but for her humanity. That was what Claire had refused her, what May had restored. The descent grew steeper. Flaps engaged. The city lights expanded like a living thing, stretching toward the horizon. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Nia. She answered. Nia's voice was tight with urgency. "Dr. Monroe, I just wanted to let you know we've received over 30 media requests in the past hour. The university's PR office wants to coordinate. Also, the dean called twice." Celeste pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Her voice was calm. "Tell the dean I'll call him in the morning, and no statements. Not yet. Not until I've grounded myself." "Understood. Do you want me to arrange a car at the terminal?" "Nope. I'll walk out like everyone else." She ended the call. Evelyn opened her eyes again. "This is going to get big, isn't it?" Celeste nodded. "Probably." "You ready for that?" Celeste looked out the window once more. "I've been ready for years. I just didn't expect it to come from 14 on a flight back from Raleigh." The wheels dropped with a soft mechanical whir. The runway lights glowed ahead. She reached for her mother's hand. When the plane touched down, There was a slight bump and then the rumbling deceleration that followed. The cabin remained silent, more so than usual. It was like everyone collectively understood that something real had happened on this flight, something more human than technical. The voice over the intercom returned. "Welcome to Chicago. Please remain seated until we reach the gate." As the plane taxied, Celeste noticed several passengers turning suddenly in their seats, watching her, not gawking, observing, processing. She expected to feel exposed, but strangely, she felt something different. Witnessed. When the aircraft stopped at the gate and the seatbelt sign clicked off, there was no rush to stand. The usual flurry of unbuckling and overhead bin warfare was absent. People moved with a strange reverence. Marcus appeared again with May behind him. He leaned in. "Security is ready. If you prefer, we can escort you down the ramp privately." Celeste shook her head. "I'm walking out like anyone else. But thank you." May stepped forward and extended a small card. "This has my contact info. If anything happens, you let me know." Celeste took it. Their eyes met. May's were slightly red. She had cried. Maybe in the galley. Maybe in the lavatory. But she had cried. Celeste gave her a small nod. "You did good," she said quietly. "Thank you, Dr. Monroe." Celeste stood helping Evelyn gather her things. Trevor walked by slowly, whispering as he passed. "They're calling you the woman in 14C online." Celeste smiled faintly. "That'll make for an interesting lecture opener next semester." People stepped aside as she walked down the aisle, but not in discomfort. It felt more like honor, like she was carrying something sacred out of that plane. As she crossed the jet bridge, the air shifted, cooler, grounded. A uniformed officer waited at the terminal entrance. Not imposing, just present. "Dr. Monroe, we're here to support you. If you need anything." She nodded once. "I need you to understand something." "Yes, ma'am. This wasn't just a slap." "I know." "Do you?" He paused. "I think I'm beginning to." She gave him a long look, then continued walking. Beside her, Evelyn reached out. "You didn't deserve what happened." "I know. But maybe," her mother said, "they needed to see it, so the rest of the world could stop pretending it doesn't." Celeste looked ahead, past the officer, past the windows, into the night beyond. The ground had never felt closer, but she had never stood taller. The automatic doors at Gate B9 parted with a soft hiss, ushering Celeste and her mother into the terminal. The lights inside were overly bright, almost clinical. Travelers milled around them, some rushing to catch connecting flights, others dragging luggage with sleepy resignation. But here, at this exact gate, time seemed to slow. Celeste felt every footstep echo in a deeper register, not just on the tiled floors, but somewhere internal. There was no spotlight, no reporters shouting her name, but still, the eyes came, glances, whispers, and then phones. A woman near the cafe counter froze when she recognized Celeste. Her phone lifted slowly. Another man nearby leaned toward his daughter and gestured subtly. The girl nodded and typed something into her tablet. "Doctor." Monroe kept walking. Evelyn gripped her hand just a little tighter. They moved steadily toward the escalator. The officer who had greeted them remained a few paces behind, a quiet escort in case anything turned volatile. But so far, there was only stillness, a reverence, and under it, a slow-forming storm of attention. "You want me to call for the car now?" Evelyn asked softly. "No. Let's walk for a bit. I need to feel the ground under me." They took the escalator down to the baggage level. Even there, Screens above the carousels buzzed with the headline already blooming. Woman in 14C. It wasn't her name, but it was becoming a symbol. Trevor had sent her the clip hours ago, and now it had been edited, narrated, slowed, zoomed, dissected. Online detectives had already found her academic bio. The fact that she was a professor, a doctor, and a humanitarian was adding fuel to the fire. But part of her knew deeply that if she had been none of those things, it would not have made what happened any less wrong. That was the problem. Society only reacts when the harmed person fits the mold of perfection, degrees, charity work, quiet dignity. But what if she had simply been a woman trying to make it home with her mother? Would they care? Would they believe her? The thought hollowed her chest in a way that felt both familiar and deeply violating. A voice called out behind her, "Dr. Monroe." She turned. It was May, still in uniform, her cheeks flushed from nerves or maybe adrenaline. She had followed them off the plane and through the terminal, unnoticed until now. I just wanted to say thank you again. And I didn't get a chance to give this to you." She extended a folded sheet of paper. Celeste unfolded it, a letter, written in neat cursive on airline stationery. It read, "You don't know me. Not really, but I've watched women like you all my life, composed, intelligent, strong. I've also watched them be silenced. Today, for the first time, I didn't stay silent because you stood still, because you didn't raise your voice. You didn't flinch. And somehow that shook me more than anything I've ever seen. Whatever happens next, please know you changed something in me. I will never go back to who I was before this flight. With respect." May Celeste folded the letter carefully, almost reverently. "Thank you," she said softly. "Your voice mattered more than you know." May nodded and wiped her eyes. Then she turned and slipped back into the crowd. Evelyn watched her go and gave her daughter a small smile. "See, even in pain, you plant seeds." Celeste didn't respond. Her throat tightened too much for words. As they walked further down the concourse, her phone buzzed again. This time from an old contact, Dean Levitt, her former mentor. She didn't answer. But a moment later, he sent a voice message. "I saw what happened. I'm so sorry. Celeste, if you want a space to talk, to breathe, to process, my door is open. No pressure, just presence." She tucked the phone away. Outside the terminal, night had deepened. A warm breeze drifted through the taxi bay. Evelyn spotted a bench and motioned to it. "Let's sit a minute," she said. "My legs need a moment to remember they belong to me." They sat, side by side, watching people come and go. Celeste closed her eyes for a few seconds, let the air move across her face, inhaled the scent of jet fuel, concrete, and something floral from a passenger's cologne. It was real, grounded. After everything, she felt strangely clear. The fear was still there of what the media would say, of the backlash, of the interviews and the twisting of her image into something palatable or political. But under that fear was something stronger, something unmoving. Conviction. Evelyn rested her head lightly on her daughter's shoulder. "You know," she said, "when your father and I marched back in the day, we knew change would never come fast, but we hoped that when it came, it would come through people like you, graceful, relentless, unshaken by foolishness." Celeste smiled softly. "I was shaken. Mama?" "Yes," Evelyn replied. "But you stood anyway. That's the difference." A Blacktown car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out with a polite nod. Monroe Celeste rose, helped Evelyn to her feet, and guided her toward the vehicle. As they drove off, she watched the terminal grow smaller in the rear window. Part of her knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Tomorrow, there would be headlines. There would be opinions, interviews, perhaps apologies. But for tonight, there was stillness. And in that stillness, a truth anchored deep inside her. She had been assaulted not because of what she did, but because of what she represented. And now the world had seen it happen. There was power in being witnessed. There was danger in silence. But tonight, she chose something else entirely. Presence, the kind that changed everything without ever raising its voice. At 4:17 Celeste Monroe stood barefoot in her kitchen, one hand wrapped around a chipped navy mug of ginger tea. Outside, the city hadn't woken yet. Chicago slept under a quilt of silence and sodium streetlight. But inside her apartment, the noise was beginning. Her inbox was flooded. 400 new emails, 37 voicemails, social media mentions climbing by the second. The woman in 14C was trending in 6 countries. She took a slow sip, the tea warming her throat but not her spirit. The quiet she'd long cultivated, the inner peace that had carried her through refugee camps, war zones, and endless academic panels now wavered under the weight of attention she never asked for. Her phone buzzed again. She turned it over, letting the message wait. She wasn't ready to be Dr. Monroe this morning. She wasn't even ready to be Celeste. She just needed to be human for a moment, bone-tired, soft-spoken. Not the headline. From the guest room, her mother coughed gently. Celeste patted across the floor and peeked in. Evelyn was sitting up in bed, watching the television with a muted remote in hand. CNN's banner read, "University Professor Struck Mid-Flight. Sparks National Outrage." Evelyn glanced over. "You're on everything, baby? They're calling you the Rosa Parks of Row 14. Celeste gave a quiet exhale, neither laugh nor sigh. Just the release of air that carried 1,000 conflicting feelings. It shouldn't take getting slapped for people to pay attention. Evelyn nodded. But now that they're looking, say something worth hearing. Celeste sat at the edge of the bed. She reached for her mother's hand, ran her thumb over the veins that ran like rivers across that soft, weathered skin. "Mama, do you think maybe I was too calm?" Evelyn blinked. "What do you mean? Like maybe if I'd yelled back? If I'd stood up and made a scene, maybe that would have done something more immediate." Evelyn's eyes softened. "That's the trap they want you in. If you had shouted, they'd call you aggressive. If you had cried, they'd call you fragile. But you stood still. And now the whole country has to look at what happened and sit with it. But do they care about what happened or just the spectacle? That's not for you to control. You did your part. The rest is theirs to wrestle with." Celeste nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Evelyn reached up and wiped it away like she did when Celeste was a child. The phone buzzed again. Celeste didn't move. "You should see who it is," Evelyn whispered. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That they'll want me to be something I'm not. A symbol, a fighter, a politician. I just wanted to go home with you. That's all I ever wanted. And you will. But baby, sometimes life makes you a witness. Not by choice, but by presence." Celeste leaned her head onto her mother's shoulder. She didn't feel strong. She didn't feel brave. She felt like a woman whose life had been cracked open midair, only to fall back to earth with nothing but questions. But beneath it, a quiet pulse of purpose beat steadily. Not loud, not triumphant, just consistent. At 13, Her assistant, Nia, called. Dr. Monroe, I know it's early, but I think you should be aware. The chancellor's requesting a university-wide statement. They're planning a press conference. Also, Good Morning America wants to interview you. Celeste didn't answer for a few seconds. Tell them I'm not ready, and I'm not a spectacle, not a quote, not a soundbite. Of course. Should I postpone the departmental symposium next week? No. Let the students present. They've worked too hard. Just remove my name from the schedule. Nia hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. They deserve their spotlight. Not mine. After hanging up, Celeste stepped out onto her small balcony. The sun had not yet risen, but the edge of the sky had softened into a gray lavender. City roofs shimmered under a layer of dew. It was the kind of morning only the grieving or the deeply changed ever got to witness. A knock came from the front door. Evelyn opened it before Celeste could move. Trevor stood there with a brown paper bag and a shy smile. I brought coffee and bagels. My mom says food helps when the world gets weird. Celeste blinked. Trevor, hi, Dr. Monroe. I hope this isn't weird. Not at all. Come in. He stepped inside, his shoulders hunched slightly. Uncertain? I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened. And thank you for not getting me in trouble. I know you saw me recording. I did. And I'm glad you did. Really. Yes. Your video told the truth. The kind no airline PR team can edit. Trevor sat at the dining table, fidgeting with the paper bag. My mom's a nurse. She said what happened to you reminded her of things she's seen. Stuff no one ever believes. Celeste nodded. That's why this matters. Do you think I did the right thing? Sharing it? Celeste paused. That depends. Why did you? Because it didn't feel right to stay quiet. And I didn't know what else to do. Then yes, you did the right thing. Trevor looked relieved. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a printed screenshot of the video. It showed the exact moment Claire raised her hand. Frozen, mid-motion. The moment before impact. I know it's weird, but I printed this for a school project. My art teacher said to capture a moment of contrast, before and after. You can have it if you want. Celeste accepted the paper slowly. Thank you, she said, studying the image. For the first time, she didn't see fear in her own eyes. She saw clarity. Trevor stood. I should go, but if you ever do a TED Talk or something, I'll sit in the front row. Celeste smiled. Deal. After he left, Evelyn looked at her daughter with a quiet kind of pride. He's one of the many watching you now, not just for what happened, but for what you'll do next. Celeste turned back to the balcony. The sun was beginning to break over the horizon. The warmth spread slowly across the buildings, touching windows, bricks, the waking city. She stood there for a while, in her cotton robe, mug in hand, barefoot, real. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she would not be silent. The sky turned golden. A new day had arrived. The courtyard at Greystone University was unusually quiet for a Monday. Sunlight filtered through tall elms that bordered the main walkway, dappling the bricks with soft gold. Campus police kept a subtle presence near the administration building, standing just far enough back not to provoke, but near enough to reassure the growing crowd. Celeste Monroe stood alone at the base of the stone steps. She had arrived early, hoping to anchor herself before the speeches began. Around her, student organizers adjusted the mic stand and arranged a modest wooden podium facing the open quad. A banner hung loosely on the second-floor balcony. It read in hand-painted strokes, "We believe women. We believe truth. We believe Dr. Monroe. The wind fluttered the edges of the sign. From a distance, Celeste watched a group of students set up folding chairs for the elders from the community. Mothers in Sunday hats, grandfathers with canes, young professionals with clipboards and urgent voices. It reminded her of rallies from the 70s that her mother once marched in. The same longing echoed through the air, the same need for dignity. Behind her, footsteps. She turned to see Dean Levitt approach. He looked thinner than she remembered, or maybe just tired. His suit, though pressed, held the stiffness of obligation. "Celeste," he said quietly, "I want to apologize. You already called. This is different." She didn't respond right away. She looked past him, toward the gathering students. "I stood on this same lawn 16 years ago," she said. "I held up a sign protesting the university's silence on a hate crime that happened 2 blocks away. You walked by that day, too. I remember. You didn't stop then, either." Levitt lowered his gaze. "I was a coward," he admitted. "And that's a hard thing to carry at this age. But I'm here now. Not to lead, just to listen, to hold the space you created." Her eyes softened, but her posture remained still. "Then listen." She stepped past him and walked slowly up the steps. By now the lawn had filled, not just with students but reporters, alumni, city officials. The university president stood to the side, uncharacteristically quiet, flanked by 2 aides. No one asked to speak before her. They all waited. Celeste stood at the podium and looked out. She didn't begin with a greeting. She didn't need applause. She waited for the silence to settle into something steady. Then she spoke. "I wasn't supposed to be the story." She paused. "I boarded a flight to bring my mother home. I asked for a blanket. That's all. And in response, I was struck. Not by accident, not by confusion, but by a moment of prejudice so sharp it broke the illusion that titles and degrees could protect me." A quiet murmur moved through the crowd. My story made headlines not because what happened to me was rare, but because I happened to survive it with cameras watching. But let me be clear. This story isn't about me. It's about everyone who was ever told to sit down, be quiet, wait their turn. She took a breath. Let her voice fall to a gentler pitch. "I am not your hero. I am not your symbol. I am a woman who said nothing and was still assaulted. I am a woman who stood still and still felt the sting. And I am a woman who will no longer carry the burden of making people comfortable while I bleed." Applause began to rise, but she raised her hand. "Not yet." The lawn hushed again. "I'm here today because silence protects no one. It only prolongs the lie, and I have carried too many lies too long. The lie that respectability keeps you safe, that degrees are armor, that calmness ensures mercy. The camera lenses seem to lean in. My students taught me better. My mother taught me better. Even a boy with a camera and trembling hands taught me better. They taught me the truth does not need permission. It only needs light." She looked out across the field of faces, young and old, wide-eyed and worn. "So today, I don't ask you to protest. I don't ask you to tweet. I ask you to sit with the discomfort, to let it ruin your appetite, to let it interrupt your coffee break, because real change begins where comfort ends." The quiet held like prayer. A student in the front row wiped her eyes. Celeste stepped back from the podium. No music played. No one clapped for a moment. And then the stillness broke, not with shouts, but with something softer. People standing, Slowly, reverently, one by one. They rose until the entire quad was on its feet, not out of celebration, but respect. Dean Levitt lowered his head. So did the university president. From the steps, Celeste's gaze found her mother standing near the administration columns, cane in hand. Evelyn nodded once. It was the only gesture she needed. Pride without theatrics, dignity without volume. After the crowd began to disperse, Trevor made his way up to her. "You made them think," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was just tired. Sometimes that's enough." Celeste gave him a faint smile. From behind the mic, she could hear murmurs of students telling each other to rewatch her speech, to post it with captions, to submit it to news networks. Some were already uploading it to live streams. She turned toward the old library beyond the quad. Its tall windows held the reflection of the crowd. And in that mirror, she didn't see a victim or a speaker. She saw someone returning to herself, someone becoming whole in public. Back inside the building, Dean Levitt approached her once more. "They want to nominate you for the ethics chair. We've never had someone of color hold it." She looked at him, unmoved. "So nominate someone else. Someone who's been doing the work long before I showed up in a headline." He blinked. "That's very generous of you. It's not generosity. It's justice." He nodded and stepped back. Celeste walked down the stairs and into the main hall. It smelled of old books and lemon floor polish. She touched the wood paneling along the wall, the grain familiar under her fingertips. She had once studied here every night, had written her dissertation under these very lights. She had built her career in the shadows of these corridors. But now she didn't walk in the shadows. Now the world had seen her in the light. She entered her old lecture hall, empty now, silent. She walked to the chalkboard and picked up a piece of white chalk. With one slow stroke, she wrote a single word in the center of the board: stillness. Then she set the chalk down and left the room. Outside, the sun filtered through the stained glass window in a new way. It painted her shoulders gold. Claire Donnelly hadn't left her apartment in 6 days. The blinds stayed drawn. The hallway light flickered whenever the heater kicked in. Dishes piled up on the counter. The world outside moved on. But inside her studio apartment above a laundromat in Queens, time had gone still. The news had stopped saying her name out loud, but she still heard it. Former flight attendant accused of assault. Viral video shows racially charged incident on Flight 715. Airline issues apology after backlash. Claire read every headline at first, then stopped, then started again. There were moments late at night when she'd find herself replaying the clip frame by frame, her arm rising, the flinch on Celeste Monroe's face, the gasp from other passengers, the boy's voice saying, "Oh my God." She didn't recognize herself in the video. Not really, but it was her hand, her voice, her choice, and choices, she now understood, had consequences that arrived long after the moment had passed. On the 7th morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot. No return address, no stamp, just her name. Claire stared at it on the floor for almost an hour before picking it up. She sat cross-legged in her living room and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. "Claire, you do not know me, but I know what it feels like to fall apart in the open, what it feels like to be called every name at once, what it feels like to be hated for something you did not fully understand until after the damage was done. I do not write to absolve, but I write because silence does not heal. If you ever want to speak not for cameras, not for defense, but for truth. I will listen. C. Mem. Claire stared at the signature. Celeste Monroe. She folded the letter once, then twice, then pressed it to her forehead and wept. Not the loud kind of weeping, not the desperate kind, just the slow kind, the kind that comes when the mask slips off and you realize you are no longer performing. You are simply human and flawed and maybe capable of change. That night, Claire sat at her old desk and pulled out a legal pad she hadn't touched in years. She wrote in blue ink, not to defend, not to beg, but to tell the truth for the first time. Dr. Monroe, I don't know if I deserve to call you that. I don't know what I deserve at all, but I received your letter, and it undid me. I've spent these last few days trying to blame the system, the training manuals, the fatigue, my own history. I've tried to tell myself I was just overwhelmed, that you looked like someone who once yelled at me, that I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But the truth is this: I saw you, and something inside me recoiled. Not because of what you did, but because of who I assumed you were. And for that, I am sorry in a way that words fail to cover. I cannot undo what I did, but I need you to know it wasn't about you, and yet it was entirely about you. You were calm, gracious, human, and I treated you like a problem to be removed. I hope someday I can understand what made me do that. I hope someday I can teach my daughter better. Yes, I have a daughter. She's 5. Her name is Lily. And she asked me yesterday why people on the internet were calling me names. I told her I made a mistake. I didn't tell her I assaulted a black woman mid-flight. I didn't tell her I reinforced centuries of pain with one gesture. But I will. Not today, but someday. Because if I don't, the cycle continues. Thank you for writing. Thank you for not disappearing into silence. And thank you for showing more humanity than I showed you. Claire. She sealed the envelope and mailed it the next morning. She didn't know if Celeste would respond. She didn't know if she even should. But that afternoon, Claire went outside for the first time in a week. She held her daughter's hand as they walked to the bookstore. She didn't wear sunglasses. She didn't check her phone. She didn't explain who she was. She just existed, one step closer to accountability. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Celeste received the envelope in her university mailbox. She waited until she was alone in her office to open it. As she read, her shoulders tensed, then softened. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed a little deeper. Then she placed the letter in a drawer. Not to forget, but to remember that even broken stories deserve endings. Later that evening, Celeste took her mother for a walk along the lake. The sky was a shade of orange only October could paint. The water rippled softly. Children raced ahead on scooters. A violinist played near the park bench. Evelyn looked over at her daughter. "You got another letter today?" "Yes." From her, Celeste nodded. And it was honest. Not perfect, but honest. That's more than most give. I'm not sure what to do with it. You don't have to do anything. Just let it be what it is. Celeste nodded slowly. She watched a leaf drift into the lake, spinning in soft circles before vanishing beneath the surface. I don't know what forgiveness looks like in public. It doesn't have to be public. Then what's the point? The point is, you're free to choose what you carry and what you set down. Celeste sat on the bench, letting the music wash over her. She thought of Claire, of Lily, of the moment that unraveled both their lives and how somehow, through silence and ink and time, they had managed to see each other again as people. Not villains, not martyrs, just human. For the first time since the flight, she felt a thread loosen inside her chest. Not release, not closure, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of peace. The hearing room on Capitol Hill was colder than expected. The polished wood panels, the flags at either end of the long room, the seal of the United States behind the chair, all of it carried a heavy formality. Rows of press cameras were stationed like sentries in the back. A soft hum buzzed from the microphones being tested by staffers in suits. Dr. Celeste Monroe sat in the first row of invited witnesses. Her gray dress suit was understated but elegant. Her mother's pendant necklace rested just below her collarbone, a steady rhythm against her chest. To her left sat Trevor Ung, now 17, tall and composed in his dark blazer. Beside him was Yvette Dawson, a longtime airline union rep. Across from them sat 3 former passengers from Raven Air Flight 715, all of whom had witnessed what happened in real time. It wasn't lost on anyone that the hearing room was full, not just with senators and aides, but with people, real people. Survivors of travel discrimination, elders who still carried stories from the 60s, parents holding hands with their daughters, young law students scribbling notes furiously, activists who had flown across the country to sit in a room where truth was finally being given a microphone. Senator Alana Reyes, chair of the Transportation Oversight Subcommittee, tapped her gavel once. Her voice, measured and crisp, carried over the room. We are here today not just because of an incident on Flight 715, but because the skies above us are not always as equal as we claim. Air travel, once a symbol of modern progress, has too often mirrored the prejudices found on the ground. Today, we hear from witnesses who lived it. She turned slightly toward Celeste. Dr. Monroe, thank you for being here. You may proceed with your statement. Celeste adjusted the mic. Her voice came steady, not loud, but clear enough to fill the space. Thank you. Senator, I'm here today not because I wanted to be, but because I understand the weight of silence. Too many stories like mine never leave the aisle. Mine did, and I intend to honor that visibility with truth. She paused, letting the silence settle. I am a professor of social ethics. I have taught at Greystone University for over a decade. I have never filed a formal complaint against an airline before. I have never raised my voice on a plane. I have never felt the need to. Until Flight 715. She looked directly at the senators, unblinking. On that flight, I was struck by a flight attendant, not because I was loud, not because I was a threat, but because I made a request, and because of what I looked like while doing it. A low murmur stirred in the gallery. The slap was physical. Yes, but the real injury was systemic. The response, the assumptions, the silence from those trained to intervene. The press release that called it a misunderstanding. The compensation offer that came with a waiver to never speak again. Trevor looked over at her, his eyes steady. She gave him a small nod before continuing. I declined that offer, not because I needed a stage, but because I believe in policy that begins with people, in accountability that doesn't require headlines to activate. Celeste shifted her posture slightly, grounding herself. This is not about one airline. It is about an industry that trains staff on evacuation speed but not on racial bias. That holds seminars on turbulence but ignores the storms its passengers live through daily. Senator Reyes leaned forward. Dr. Monroe, what specific changes would you recommend? Celeste reached for the folder beside her and opened it. I have 3 proposals. First, mandatory annual anti-bias and trauma-informed training, co-led by lived experience consultants. Second, the establishment of an independent ombudsman for in-flight discrimination reports. Third, real-time passenger-accessible de-escalation protocols. Senator Brooks, a former pilot himself, raised an eyebrow. You believe passengers should be able to intervene? Celeste didn't blink. I believe in transparency. If you want trust at 30,000 feet, give passengers more than coffee and vague apologies. Give them recourse. Trevor was next to speak. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he began describing what it was like to capture the moment on his phone. The panic, the responsibility, the backlash he got afterward from strangers online. I wasn't trying to go viral, he said. I just didn't want the truth to disappear. He finished with a line that made the room fall silent again. I learned more in those 10 seconds than any civics class ever taught me. After Yvette Dawson shared her testimony about the cultural rot within airline staff structures, the committee asked to hear from two of the fellow passengers from Flight 715. One, a white retired school teacher, recounted the shock she felt watching the slap. I kept telling myself, this can't be happening. Not here. Not now. But it did. And I did nothing. The other, a Latino father traveling with his young daughter, simply said, I saw my daughter's face when it happened, and I knew that if she grows up thinking this is normal, I've failed her. When the hearing recessed for a short break, reporters swarmed the hallways. News outlets flashed with headlines. Monroe urges federal oversight in sky discrimination and truth at 30,000 feet. In the private waiting room, Celeste sat alone for a moment. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the gravity of it all. The weight of generations packed into one voice, on one microphone, on one day. Senator Rhea stepped in briefly. That was one of the most grounded testimonies I've heard in 15 years. Your proposals are now being circulated in committee notes. Celeste nodded. Not with pride, but with purpose. If even one policy shifts, it will be worth it. Before leaving the room, the senator added softly, we need people like you. Don't vanish after today. Outside. As the afternoon sun hit the marble steps of the Capitol, a crowd had gathered. Some held signs. Others held silence, and at the center, just watching, were people who looked like her. Older women in Sunday clothes, black professors, young girls with notebooks. Celeste exited the building and descended the steps slowly. Not like someone making a grand exit, but like someone who finally realized she belonged in these halls too. The airport was quiet that morning. Not empty, just quiet. The way a place feels when it remembers something sacred happened there. The way a room does after someone forgives without words. Gate B27 wasn't special by design. Just another gate in Terminal 3. A row of dark blue seats. Charging stations. An old vending machine humming in the corner. A row of windows that caught the morning sun just right. Celeste Monroe stood by the windows, her coffee cooling in her hand. It had been exactly 6 months since Flight 715. 6 months since the slap. 6 months since the silence that followed. 6 months since everything cracked open, revealing all the parts of her life she had kept polished for the world. She had returned to her classroom 2 weeks ago. The students were respectful. More attentive than before, but also quieter, like they were watching something sacred unfold, like they were no longer just learning from her, but bearing witness to who she was. Celeste had kept her lectures sharp, but added more space between the words, letting the silences teach too. She still hadn't returned to flying often, but this morning she was boarding a plane. A short flight to Raleigh to speak at a conference on restorative justice. The keynote slot, She'd almost declined it. But her mother had gently reminded her that healing didn't come from retreating. It came from returning to the place where the pain began and seeing it with new eyes. Celeste turned as she heard footsteps behind her. Trevor Ung was walking toward her, rolling a small carry-on behind him. He had grown taller since the hearing, the kind of height that seemed to surprise even him. "You didn't have to come," Celeste said gently. "I wanted to." Trevor replied, "My mom said it was okay. Besides, I haven't flown since, I know." They stood at the window together, watching the planes taxi. "Do you ever think about it?" Trevor asked. "Every day?" "Me too, but not in the same way anymore." Trevor nodded. After the hearing, 3 universities reached out to him about early enrollment. He had started a small nonprofit for youth media training called Witness. "You ready to board?" he asked. "In a minute. Just soaking this in." A flight attendant passed by. She looked over briefly, nodded politely, and kept walking. No recognition, no performance, just stillness. Celeste felt her shoulders drop an inch. Her breath slowed. It was the little things that told her something had changed. Not in everyone, but in enough people that the silence felt less suffocating now. Later, aboard the plane, Celeste sat by the window. Trevor took the aisle seat. The middle remained empty. She glanced around. The cabin was calm. A mother rocked her toddler 2 rows ahead. An elderly couple unwrapped homemade sandwiches. A business traveler typed quietly. The flight attendant approached with water. "Would you like anything to drink?" she asked. Celeste looked up. The woman was young, no older than 25. Her voice was steady, her posture respectful, but there was no forced smile, just a genuine presence. "Water's perfect. Thank you." The woman nodded and returned moments later with a bottle. Celeste turned it slowly in her hands, then set it down and closed her eyes. She didn't need anything else. Not applause, not apologies, not even answers. Just air, and motion, and stillness. As the plane took off, she let herself rest for the first time in months, somewhere over Virginia. Trevor leaned slightly toward her. "Dr. Monroe, yes, do you ever feel proud of how it turned out?" Celeste didn't answer right away. She looked out at the clouds, the sun streaking across them like brushstrokes. "Not proud," she finally said, "but certain that I did what needed to be done." Trevor nodded. "That's enough, right? It's enough for me." When the flight landed, there was no press, no crowd, no questions, just the hum of life moving forward. As they exited the plane, Celeste felt a hand gently tap her shoulder. She turned. It was the flight attendant from earlier. "I just wanted to say thank you. I watched your hearing online. My supervisor showed it to our whole crew. We've changed a lot since then. Because of you." Celeste placed her hand over her heart. "Thank you for saying that, and for being here, really being here." The woman smiled and moved on. Trevor looked at Celeste and smiled faintly. That was kind of amazing. Celeste didn't respond. She just stood for a moment at the gate, letting her body remember what peace felt like. Outside, a driver waited with a sign. Monroe, Celeste glanced at the terminal one last time before stepping forward. At the conference, her speech was not filled with fire. It was quiet, measured, built on the idea that change doesn't roar, it whispers, it repeats itself quietly in small rooms, in training sessions, in flight manuals, in the minds of daughters asking, "Why did that happen?" She ended her speech with a story about her father, a train porter in the 1960s, who once said, You cannot always stop the train from running over you, but you can lay tracks for someone else to walk safely across. When she stepped down from the stage, the applause was steady, not thunderous, just enough. Outside the venue, a little girl ran up to her with a notebook. "Are you the plain lady?" Celeste smiled. "I suppose I am. Can I be like you when I grow up?" "You already are, sweetheart." She signed the notebook and handed it back. Trevor stood by the rental car, holding the keys. "Ready." Celeste nodded. "Let's go home." And just like that, they drove off into a world not yet perfect, not yet just, but shifting. And in the shifting, something holy began. Not revenge, not victory, but the soft kind of justice that lives inside every story bravely told. Sometimes the loudest message is delivered in silence, a silence that speaks of restraint, dignity, and a depth of strength few ever recognize until it's too late. Dr. Celeste Monroe didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate, but she held up a mirror to a system that had long gotten away with quiet cruelty. One aisle, one seat, one assumption at a time. Through her calm, she ignited a reckoning. This story reminds us that injustice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it's disguised as protocol. Sometimes it wears a name tag and carries a tray. But when one woman chooses courage over convenience, grace over aggression, and truth over silence, change begins. And as we leave the gates of this story, we're left with a question. What would you have done on that flight? If this story moved you, stirred something in your heart, or made you think twice about how we treat one another, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, because we're not done. There are more stories ahead, stories that confront, comfort, and challenge us to be better. We'll see you on the next flight. And next time, listen closely, because silence, too, has something to say.